All right, Erev Tov, everybody. In the last week, we already emphasized the time that we are in, time of the month of Elul. Started the last Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Elul. And obviously, this is the time of the year where not only we are taking stock and calculating our past year, we begin our preparation for Rosh Hashanah. We prepare our preparation for the new year. And it's a time of reflection. It's a time of stock taking. It's a time of really examining each and every one of us where we're holding in our relationship with Hashem. And obviously, as we're getting ready for the days of atonement, Yom Kippur, and so on and so forth, it's an appropriate time also to take the proper calculation where are we holding in our relationship between each other, with fellow human beings. And this week, what I want to focus is on something that keeps on coming back every year in the month of Elul. But hopefully with tonight's teaching, and we could somehow bring this to a closing so we don't have to revisit next year again those particular issues. This week's Parsha always happens to be in the month of Elul. And it's a Parsha that there are many, many commandments. As I told you, this last 3 weeks, Parshas, last week's Parsha, this week's Parsha, and next week's Parsha, there is about 155 commandments. Huge portion of the commandments of the Torah are just in these 3 Parshas. If the entire Torah is 613 commandments, there's a huge combination of them just in these three weeks. In the opening of this week's Parsha sits one of the greatest secrets for human improvement in our service to Hashem, something that is very much worthy in a month like this to really pay attention to. And I would like to open up the class, first of all, with quoting that opening verse. The Torah begins with the words in this week's Parsha, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18. Shoftim v'shoitrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. And we should place judges, and shoitrim means police. And you should place to yourself in all your gates. Asher Hashem Elokecha noisen l'chol shvatecha, the God Almighty gives to your tribes. V'shaftu esa'om mishpat tzedek, they will judge the people a just judgment. Now, the opening verse of this week's Parsha is basically the commandment. It's a double commandment. It's the commandment of that in every place where there are a settlement of Jewish people, you need to have a court. And Maimonides, the one who describes Jewish law in great length, quotes that there are 3 forms of court. There's a court that you do in a city that you have, Jerusalem, where most Jews live. You have to have 71 judges. Any place you have over 120 Jews, you have to have 23 judges. And in every place you have less than 120 Jews, you're supposed to have at least a court of 3 judges. And the job of the judges is people have questions, people have debates between each other, people have problems. And the job is to come before the judge, and the judge listens to both sides and he says the verdict. And then there's a policeman. The job of the policeman is to actually take the verdict that the judge made and make sure that that verdict is being actualized. Make sure that whatever the judge decided is actually being put into practice. The very obvious question that comes up just as we open up the verse is this interesting terminology that the Torah uses, Shoftim v'shoftrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. The word lecha means singular. We're talking here about a communal commandment. This is not a commandment to place judges and police in a city. Is not an obligation for the individual. It's an obligation for the community. It's one of those things that as a city, as a community, as people, we have to appoint judges and police. The interesting term here, where the Torah uses Shoftim v'Shotrim titein lecha, really, if you know Hebrew, you know that the proper word here should have been titnu lachem. Titnu lachem means in the plural. In Hebrew, there is singular and plural. So lecha is singular, lachem is plural, that you should place judges and police for you in the plural in all your gates. So just a first question that just comes straight in front of the eyes of the reader is, why does it say singular? And there is many, many discussions about this one word, like everything else in the Torah. Another thing that comes before our eyes is the word gates. The whole She'arecha doesn't mean cities. The whole She'arecha means you should place them in all your gates. What is exactly the job of the judges to sit at the gate? I mean, Maimonides, when he describes the laws of placing judges, he says that the judges are sitting at the gate. Why are judges? Maybe in those days, the custom was that the judicial system was placed in the entrance of the city. Why necessarily that? There is one of those inspirational explanations that says because the gate is basically where the entire city's safety and security is pending on the gate. Yeah, so the entrance to the city or the exit of the city, the gate is kind of like where safety of the city and the members who live there is pending based on the gate, if it's open or it's closed. So the idea of placing judges and police at the gates is referring to that kind of like what validates a city, yeah, that gives a city the power of being a city, is that the city has judges and police that are seated in the gate. But what I want to refer to today is some very powerful mystical explanation that is brought by the Musar and Kabbalists in the last few hundred years. That idea behind this verse really changes our entire approach on the month of Elul. That attitude will ultimately change our entire view, even in our life. Okay. Regarding this question, why does it say lecha? You should place the gates for you. There is a beautiful mystical explanation that one of the commentaries on the Torah, the Kli Yakar, says a beautiful explanation. He says a judge could only be a judge if he judges himself. A policeman could only be a policeman if he polices himself. You cannot judge someone else if you are not placing judgment upon yourself. In other words, you cannot correct someone else if you yourself is not corrected. What he's saying is the Torah comes to teach the judges. It's a law to the judges. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You should place upon yourself judgment. You should place upon yourself guards and police. Only then you can become the judge of someone else. The Gemara over there in Baba Basra, the Gemara brings a statement from one of the famous Amoraim. His name is Reish Lakish, who says, Kshoit atzmecha v'achar kach kshoit acherim. Fix yourself, and then you could fix others. The Gemara brings a beautiful story that I will share with you. The Gemara brings a story of Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai, he was a a judge in the city that he lived. And he had a tree that grew out of his yard and was basically covering the main street on the outside. The branches of this tree were overgrown to the outside street. So the Talmud says that one time there was a member in the town that was being called into justice by his neighbors, and the neighbors were complaining that that guy had his tree overgrown to the street. And when they are riding their donkeys or their camels, those branches that are sprouting outside of this guy's yard onto the street are disturbing them, as they are riding their animals, and they demanded from the guy to cut the branches of his trees. The guy was refusing. So they brought him to justice in front of Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai knew that he himself has the same problem. He also has a tree that is overgrown to the street. And that night, before the following morning when they were appearing in court, Rabbi Yanai hired a group of workers. And the Talmud says he cut down the branches of the trees from his yard that were going out to Rishus Harabim, were going out to the public property, and making sure that he's taking care on his issue. Obviously knowing that he is not being called to judgment because of his position. No one is calling him out for his tree. So he took care on his tree, and the next day there was the court case, and Rabbi Yanai Paskant, he said the verdict that the guy has to remove his tree. The guy, when he heard the verdict, he says, Rabbi Yanai, but you yourself have a tree that's growing outside to the street. So Rabbi Yanai said to him, go check it out. And they went to check out the yard of Rabbi Yanai, and obviously the tree wasn't there. And this is what the Talmud finishes up with the words of Rish Lakish, Kishoit atzmecha, correct yourself. And only after that, Kishoit acherim, seek out the truth in others. Yeah. And this is really a foundation in Jewish education in general for all future generations. Those of us who are teachers who now go back to school to educate children, those of us who are parents who are raising children, you cannot give over to your children commands and teachings unless you're living those teachings. I think it was a couple of years ago during the high holidays, we talked about that. Judaism is not taught. Judaism is caught. The values that you have, you can't teach to your children. The values that you have, the style of life that you are living, this is what your children pick up, how dedicated, how devoted you are for the life that you are living. This is the only way your children will pick up and maybe take a lesson. So the Kli Yakar basically saying is that Shoftim v'Shoitrim titin lecha, titin lecha b'chol sharecha. What does it mean, titin lecha? Titin lecha means you should appoint on yourself judges and police. Talking to the judge, put it upon yourself. So when you're going to come to a situation of judgment, you will actually be able to inspire others to do the right thing because you are doing yourself your own work. And when you take care of yourself and you're doing your own work, then you could demand from others to do their work as well. A beautiful incident happened this past week where I was in communication with someone regarding an act of kindness that took a big leap of faith of that person to do that. It was something about doing something that really took a lot of discomfort. And at the end of the whole thing, I kept on pointing out to the person how proud I am of him that doing that. He had to wake up in the middle of the night to do something. And I was going on, really appreciating and expressing my appreciation for him doing that act of kindness that he did. And he kept on saying, of course I would have done it. Of course I would have done it. And I said, no, it's not of course. It's a chiddush. It's special that you got up in the middle of the night and you did this act of kindness. It's really unusual. And then he says something very, very powerful that, again, that was very special for me to hear. He says, watching how some of you, referring to Shluchim, are doing your acts of kindness in such a selfless, dedicated way, and then you are asking me to do something once in my life, it was very obvious to me that I'm going to do that. There's no way I could say no, knowing that you live that life and your friends all the time, always. And that's how it is. Shoftim v'shoitrim titan lecha b'chol sharecha. If you are willing to place judges, if you are willing to place discipline upon yourself, then you could ask your children for discipline. But if the discipline in your own life is constantly questioned, but the only thing you have is to demand discipline from someone else, obviously you're going to only encounter rejection, and you're only going to encounter grief and pushback. There's a beautiful teaching. I don't think I ever taught that before about Yosef and his brothers. One of those teachings that came through, I think, in the last couple of months. I don't remember where I heard it from. Obviously, none of those things are my own teachings. This is always review teachings from somewhere else that I read or studied somewhere. So I'm just going to share this with you because it just came to me. You know, Yaakov sends Yosef to see how the brothers are doing. You know the story? I don't have to refresh your memory. Yaakov sends Yosef to go see how the brothers are doing. This is where Yosef is getting virtually almost killed and then eventually sold as a slave. Now, Yosef knows that his brothers absolutely hate him. He knows that he, based on what he's feeling and perceiving, the way his brother's relationship is towards him, he knows to go see how the brothers are doing is really dangerous. Not only that, it comes a certain point while he's going to visit his brothers that he's lost. You remember that piece? That he's lost in the way, he doesn't know where he's going, and he's confused, and then suddenly an angel, a person appears to him, angel Gabriel, Malach Gabriel, appears to Yosef, and he asks Yosef, what are you looking for? And Yosef says those beautiful words, Esachai anochi mevakesh. I'm looking for my brothers. Agidan ali echaneim. Tell me where are my brothers. He's looking for his brothers. And the angel directs Yosef to where his brothers are. And the Talmud says the angel is telling his brothers, he's telling Yosef, your brothers have moved away from here. And Rashi says, what is the angel referring to? That your brothers don't like you anymore. And they actually went to a place called Dosan to go find all types of skillful ways how to get rid of you. So angel is telling Yosef pretty clearly that if he keeps on going after his brothers, he will pay with his life. He will pay with his life. But instead of Yosef taking the message and knowing that he's putting his life in danger and he shouldn't go look for his brothers, what does Yosef do? He goes anyways. And the question that I didn't see anybody asking is, how was Yosef allowed to put his life in danger in order to go look for his brothers? He knows that they're going to murder him. He's actually becoming an obstacle. If he actually goes there, he's causing his brothers to murder him. So why does he keep on going? Why doesn't he return back to his father and say, an angel just saw me. The angels just told me that your brothers are hateful and they're going to kill you. Why does he keep on going? And here comes a very, very powerful teaching. The Rebbe teaches it. I have never seen the teaching before, but I just heard about it probably the last couple of months. And the Rebbe says as follows. In Yaakov's house, there was a bigger problem than hating the younger brother. That jealousy towards Yosef that the Torah describes, that hatred that they had towards Yosef, there was a problem. But that was not the big problem in that family. There was actually a larger problem in Yaakov's family. And you know what it was? the lack of respect to the father. The story of Shechem was a major incident where Yaakov was very disappointed by what his children did. They went and they deceived the whole city and they murdered the whole city. Okay? There was a big event where they completely ignored their father's wills and wishes and they did whatever they wanted. And then there was the story with Reuven, changing the beds and moving the tents around and doing whatever they want. Yosef knew that his brothers are completely wrong about what's going on, the way they treat their father. Unacceptable. The Kibud Av, honor thy father, that is one of the 10 commandments in the Torah, was being violated over and over again and again. And Yosef knew one thing. I need to show my brothers what does it mean honoring your father. Now, how will I show them? Literally, to do an act of suicide. That when my father sends me to go see how you're doing, I go, even though I might pay with my life for that, I'm going anyways. That's how he's going to teach his brothers Kibud Av. That's how he's going to teach his brothers respect to his father. Literally to fall into their hands and knowing that he's paying a price, but future generations will read the story and they will see a son going and following his father's wishes, even though he knew he's going to pay with his life. That act of self-sacrifice, that act of Mesiras Nefesh, that will leave a mark on the family to never again anybody going back on the wishes of their father. And this is exactly what Yosef did. What's going on? I'm trying to give a class now. Wait for me in your room. I'm going to come. Mommy's in a meeting with the Hebrew school teachers. Okay? Just go lay down in your room. I'm going to come after I'm done with my class. I know, so just keep your door open. Okay? You can hear my voice from here. And this is what Yosef was teaching his brothers. Sorry, guys. Nechama is in a meeting with the Hebrew school teachers, and the kid, Chava, needs to go to sleep. Are you okay? I'm going to be here. You can hear my voice. Yeah? And this is exactly what the Torah is trying to teach us here. You cannot be a judge. You cannot be a policeman. You cannot be a teacher. You cannot be an educator. The only way to put justice in its place is to present it in the way you live your own life. You can't do it through the whip. You can't give it through speeches. When you are living it as an example, yeah, Shoftim v'Shoftim titen lecha, you for yourself, yeah, that is how you could later on demand from people to live their life, like Rabbi Huna did with his tree, like Yosef does with his act of self-sacrifice. Now, this is just the teaching of the Kli Yakar. Now, this is a beautiful explanation, a beautiful teaching and a beautiful explanation for itself. However, there is another extended explanation that is a little bit deeper, a little bit more as revolutionary as that one, but each one of us more personal. This is a teaching that comes from Reb Chaim Vital, from the Kabbalah, from the Shalom, students of the Hari, and the Rebbe, in many of his teachings of Elul, teaches that teaching as well. Now, the word She'arecha means gates. Judges and police you should place upon the gates. What are the gates? What are the gates? So here we're going to reroute ourselves for a moment to our human body. And our human body, the way we take in information is through our portals. What are the portals? So each and every one of us is blessed with senses. We have vision. That's how we take in information, through seeing. We're taking information through hearing. We're taking information through touching, kinesthetic, you know, sensing something. We take in information through our mouth, tasting, and we're taking information through smelling. The five senses that each and every one of us is blessed with, each person is different. Some people have one sense that is more amplified and more open than the other ones. Some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, some people are more kinesthetic. But every single person, that's how you take in your experiences of life. Any experience of life comes through those portals. This is why, in general, in education, there's such an emphasis on using all the five senses in teaching. If it's through visuals, if it's hands-on, Jewish history is filled, especially the night of the Seder, when we have this night of doing the Higadat Alavincha, expressing and teaching the history to the next generation. At the Seder, we use all the five senses. We use the Seder plate, we use the taste of the matzah, we use the reading, we use the singing, we do everything. We basically not manipulate, but we use each one of the five senses in order to bring in and re-experience the story of Pesach. Those five portals, that each and every one of us, that's how we experience, that's how we feel and experience everything. The Rebbe teaches us that these are the gates. When we talk about you, in the singular, you should put judges, you should put police in each one of those gates. It refers to this, that the person has to put in a question of judgment on his eyes, on his ears, asking himself, should I look at it? Shouldn't I look at it? Is it worth it for me to open up my eyes to this experience? Or maybe this is something I need to close my eyes and not look. Same thing also with listening. To ask yourself before anything you do, should I do it? To be the judge, to be the one to making the decision. Should I look at it or shouldn't? Should I open up my portal or should I close my portal? Now, when a person thinks about the moments when we stumble and we fall through, it's always the trigger that brings us to the act. It always begins from opening our senses to something that ultimately triggers our impulse and causes us to fall down to those places that we don't want to go down to. And it all up begins, you could cry about the sin as much as you want and pound your chest on Yom Kippur. That sin would have never happened if that portal would have been closed. Everyone who does advertisements or commercials knows the importance of creating the intrigue, creating the trigger, creating the excitement, making a person aware of something, that if you do this and this, this and this will happen. And obviously, once the portals are open, once the person saw it, it becomes very difficult to unsee. The Rebbe Rashab in his teachings talks a lot about the power of looking. That's a very, very powerful portal that a lot of us in our generation, because of the internet and everything, we struggle with that impulse of allowing our eyes to be open and see things that create a tremendous effect on our spirit and our soul. That those type of behaviors would have never even be impulse or interested in doing. The only reason why we become so entrenched in that and it becomes a behavior issue is because we allow those portals to be open. If you look at the first story of Adam and Eve, the way the serpent is, the way the Torah is describing that tree of knowledge, The Torah doesn't describe just the taste of the food or the qualities. The Torah speaks about the beauty of the tree. The tree was so beautiful, and the tree was looked so interesting. Yeah, it touches about the visual experience of just looking at the tree of knowledge. That looking of the tree of knowledge, that became the ultimate beginning of downfall. That one thing led to another, and they ended up eating from the tree. Bilam, when he brings the sin upon the daughters of Moab, upon the Jewish people, uses the same tactic. The Talmud says that he was bringing ladies to sell clothing made out of flax seeds, and people were going outside to go buy those clothing. And when someone was buying to purchase, then they would invite him into the tent, and over there was the young ladies who were serving wine. Yeah, the visual power had a tremendous, tremendous ability to bring a person to the lowest places. So when the Torah tells us, Shoftim v'shoitrim tidanocha b'chol shorecha, comes the month of Elul, the Torah reminds us this is a month of self-examination. This is a month of conscious examination, examining your conscience, examining where you're holding in life, and how this past year was. And here comes this tremendous piece of advice. If you want to be able to unstick yourself from some of those behaviors, instead of working and lamenting and being upset about the behavior itself that is sinful or questionable, begin to take a look on the path, on the gate that open up the door to lead you into those unhealthy behavioral patterns. Talks about the Nazirite. Yeah, when the Torah talks about the Nazirite, who takes upon himself not to drink wine in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. The Torah uses a very interesting term. The Torah says, wine and miyayin v'sheichor yazir, choymetz yayin v'choymetz sheichor lo yishte. The word yazir means stay away. And then it says, don't drink. So there's two things. There's one thing is don't drink, because drinking wine for a Nazirite, that's the sin. You're not allowed to drink wine. But the Torah gives an introduction to that. Stay away. Stay away from wine. In order not to drink, you have to stay away from it. If you're not going to stay away, if you're going to keep on hanging out in the bar, and you're going to keep on being in places where alcohol is being served, then obviously you're going to drink. There's the famous story about Samson, also a Nazirite, where he, those of you who know the story from the Bible, where Samson is alone and a lion comes and attacks him, and Samson takes the lion and tears him up. And the story over there goes that the reason why Samson was alone is because they were passing by a vineyard, and his parents wanted to walk through the vineyard, and Samson made a turn to go around, and suddenly he found himself alone facing that lion. Yeah. So when they arrived to the area of, the Torah says, the Pasuk over there says in the book of Shoftim, Vayavoyu at Karmei Timnasa, they came till the vineyards of Timnah. This was the place where they lived. So when they were about to reach those vineyards, Shimshon, who was a Nazirite, knew, I can't even pass by that. It's not just about drinking wine or eating grapes or being involved with that. Even the trigger, even allowing me to be in a place where I might be triggered by that, even that I have to stay away. So this is really the teaching here that brings us into the awareness of what the month of Elul is all about. Someone who takes upon himself this month to do tshuva. And each and every one of us, this is the month where tshuva is the center of this month. This is what we have to focus on. The essence of tshuva is not to cry about your sin. It's a big mistake where some people mistakenly believe that during this month we have to cry about our sin. No. Crying about your sin only becomes an introduction, an invitation for another act of sin. That's how it is. because you already felt bad about it. So you end up doing it again. The month of Elul is a month where we have to take a very strong and powerful look on the gate. Shoftim v'shoitrim titan lecha b'chol she'arecha. Take a look at the gate. What happens in your gates? Are you filtering the gates? Is there a very strong judge and policeman standing at the gate in order for you not to come back next year again and cry about the same sin? Take a look at the gates. What's happening at the gates? Yeah. It all begins in that moment, in that connection, in that look, in the thought. When you stop it right there, you're not going to get to that place of real darkness, the place of sin. And I'm going to conclude with what we spoke last week very briefly about Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li. The last letters in each one of them is the letter Yud. Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li, the last letters is Yud, equals 40. These are the 40 days between the beginning of Elul and Yom Kippur. Now, the number 40 is a number that is being brought a lot in the Torah. It's one of those numbers that you see all the time. And the three things that we are focused on during the month of Elul is Torah, Tefillah, and Teshuvah. Each one of them starts with the letter Taf. The letter Taf is a number of 40 or 400. Yeah, it's 10 times 40. The number 40 is brought down regarding the 40 days of the flood, the 40 years in the desert, the 40 days that Moses sat in the mountain. He sat on 3 times 40. Yeah, there was 3 times 40. Moshe himself is being the leader of the Jewish people for 40 years of his life. What is that? What is the number 40? What is the importance of that number? What's the focus of that number? So Hasidus explains that the number 40 is the number, the amount of time that's necessary to create a new creation. The Talmud says in the Tractate of Brachas that it takes 40 days for a fetus to be developed. It talks about prayer for the gender of the baby. So the Talmud says that after 40 days, you cannot pray anymore for the gender, because after 40 days, there's already a gender for the baby. And that's the example where the Talmud says for prayer in vain. You know, when you're praying for something that has no meaning, is to pray for a baby's gender after 40 days of conception. So 40 is the number of time, the number of days, the body of time that is necessary for something to transition and come into full being, into full formation. Moshe Rabbeinu took 40 days and 40 nights to be in the mountain to learn the Torah. For that was to transition the Torah from heaven down to earth. The flood took 40 days and 40 nights, so the world can move from pre-flood, that there was a disorder and destroyed world, for the world to come to its purification. This is why a mikveh also is made out of a body of 40 se'ah. That's the amount of water. There's 40 se'ah. This is a measurement of how much a mikveh is, because a mikveh is a place of transition from impurity to purity. It has to happen through a body of 40. Now, the word mayim in Hebrew is mem, yud, mem. Mem is 40, yud is 10, and then there's another mem is 40. The mayim, the word mayim is 40 and 40, and the yud is the middle, is the letter of submission, nullification. That the water is where purification happens, transition happens. The way of changing, transforming a person himself takes 40 days. It takes 40 days. The 40 days of Elul is the 40 days that is being given for us to do the avodah, to do the service to Hashem, to move ourselves from one place of being to another place of being. And the first step for all of that is to get rid of the trigger, to take away that original initial connection that we have with negativity. Yeah? If you are on a diet, you make sure that there is no cake in the refrigerator. If you decided to stop smoking or drinking, you make sure there's no cigarettes or alcohol in the house. And in spirituality, you make sure that those eyes and those ears and those portals are completely devoted and dedicated only to positive things. So I'm going to conclude the class tonight a little early because I am also in a position of a babysitter tonight. Just concluding the class by really inviting everyone to take a little bit of time tonight, the night before Shabbos. We're already holding deep in the month of Elul, and to really think about those things in our lives, those portals in yourself. And again, this is really private. Every person with his own avoid, every person with his own work that he needs to do, with a lot of love. Yeah, don't do it with judgment and don't do it with anger or with self-hatred, or self-examination has to be done with a lot of compassion. There's enough noise of hurt and pain in the world. But to really sit down with yourself and to kind of like take a good look, take a hard look about what's happening with the eyes, what's happening with the ears, what's happening with your portals. Obviously, there is enough time to ask from God to forgive us for any misbehaviors that was done throughout the year. But in order for that not to be repeated ever again, the portals are the ones who need to be examined and looked at. There is a verse that we say on Friday before Shabbos in the chapter of Psalms. We say, Evili miderech pishon. The fools from the path of sin. Misano, but they are fasting because of their sin. So the Hasidic translation of this verse is, the fool cries about his sin. He doesn't cry about the path. There is a path that led you to sin. Instead of focusing on the sin and crying on that, the focus has to be, what led me there? What is the triggers? What am I not careful about? It causes me to de-escalate to such a place where I end up doing things that are not okay. And this is what the Parsha reminds us. Shoftim v'shoitrim titen lecho b'chol sharecho. God Almighty is reminding each and every one of us as we are in this middle of the month of Elul. Put a judge, a compassionate judge. And sometimes you need a policeman, a little bit more force. Yeah, someone else to watch over you, to make sure that that decision that you made actually is being executed. B'chol sharecho, in all your gates, asher Hashem Elokecha noisim l'chodesh v'decha, that God Almighty has gifted you. God gave you a gift of eyes and ears and all those senses. Take care of them. Watch over them. Make sure those gates are well protected. So then the body will be safe. The soul is going to be whole. Thank you all for being here tonight. Have a wonderful evening. And God willing, we'll see each other very soon, next week again. And I'm sorry for cutting it short,